Welcome back to SK Educates. In today's video, we're going to be running through all the basics of algebra. I'll be covering the fundamentals from collecting like terms to factoring and expanding and even solving equations. So let's just jump straight into the video. What is algebra? Now, algebra is where we represent numbers that we're normally trying to solve for by letters, and they can use whatever letter they want in the alphabet, but most commonly you'll see X, Y, Z being used. Now let's suppose you had a fruit bowl, and in this fruit bowl you had 2 apples, which will represent by 2a. And you went to the shop and you bought 4 more apples, so plus 4a. How many apples do you now have in total? Well, 2 apples plus 4 apples gives you 6 apples. Suppose you also had 4 bananas, but you ate one of these bananas, so minus 1b, which we'll just write as minus b. Just as a note, if you just have a letter on its own, it's the same as 1 of that letter. So if you had 4 bananas and you ate 1 banana, how many bananas do you have left? 3 bananas. Quite simple. Now let's put this together. Let's say you had a situation where you have 2 apples and 3 bananas, and then you ate an apple. How many fruits of each type do you have left in this fruit bowl? So 2 apples minus 1 apple. Remember, if there's no number there, it's just a 1. It's just going to be 1 apple, which is A. And you haven't changed the amount of bananas that are in the fruit bowl, so you just have plus 3b. Now what we just did is collected like terms. So we collected all the A's together and all the B's together. And this simplifies the expression to get A plus 3b. Now another example, but in terms of X and Y, which is more common to see. If you have 4x plus 3y plus x minus 2y, to collect like terms, collect all the x's together and all the y's together. So we have 4x plus x. Remember, if there's no number in front of it, it's just a 1. So 4x plus 1x gives you 5x. Now we have plus 3y minus 2y. Plus 3y minus 2y just gives you plus 1y, which we just write as plus y. Another example, collect all the xy's together. So we have 4xy plus 2xy. So 4xy plus 2xy just gives you 6xy. And then plus 3z, which hasn't changed. It's just plus 3z. Now, what we just learned is collecting like terms. Hopefully that's all clear. Basics part 2. If I have 2x, that just means 2 multiplied by x. Remember, x is just representing a number that we'd solve for. Now, if you have 2 over x, that's the same as 2 divided by x. Similarly, if we have x over 2, that's the same as x divided by 2. This is just important to know, and you'll understand why in the next section. Equations. For the first few examples, I'm going to be going over them quite slowly, so please feel free to adjust the speed to your liking. Here we have x plus 10 equals 18. Remember I told you that the x represents the unknown that we're trying to solve for. So essentially this equation is saying what number plus 10 equals 18. When it comes to solving equations in general, the one thing you need to remember is that when you move anything over the equal sign, the opposite happens to it. And it will make more sense when I go through this example. So x is our unknown, so we're trying to get that by itself. So I have to move this plus 10 to the other side. But because I'm moving it over the equal sign, it's going to become a minus 10. So on the left-hand side, we have x equals, and you move this plus 10 to the other side. So 18 minus 10. So x equals 18 minus 10 is just 8. And you've solved for the unknown. So now we have 2x equals 10. Again, because you want to get x on its own, we need to somehow remove this 2. To remove it, you have to do the opposite. So rather than timesing by 2, we divide both sides by 2. Because remember, 2x means 2 times x. So the opposite of times is divide. So whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So 2 divided by 2, it will just cancel out and become 1, which is what we want, because we just want x on this side. And then 10 divided by 2 is 5. And again, you solve for the unknown. Our next example. If I have x over 4 equals 5, x over 4 means x divided by 4. So to get x on its own, we have to do the opposite. The opposite of divide by 4 is times by 4. So I'm going to times this side by 4. So essentially you're bringing this up, and then x becomes 5 multiplied by 4. So x equals 20. Now we learned the 3 basics of equations. Let's put it together and go to a more difficult example. Here we have 2x plus 3 equals 13. Remember, you want to get the x on its own. So first, let's move this plus 3. When you move this plus 3 to the other side, it becomes the opposite, which is minus 3. So we're left with 2x equals 13. Then when you move this over, remember, the opposite happens. So the plus 3 becomes a minus 3. So you're left with 2x equals 13 minus 3, which is 10. But we still don't have x on its own. So as you can see, this is 2 multiplied by x. So the opposite of multiplied by 2 is divided by 2. So we divide both sides by 2. That cancels. 10 divided by 2 equals 5. So x equals 5. Another example. Here we have x over 2 plus 1 equals 16. Again, let's move this plus 1 to the other side. So I'm going to have x over 2. When you move the plus 1 to the other side, it becomes a minus 1. So 16 minus 1. So x over 2 equals 15. Now, we still don't have x on its own. We have x divided by 2. We do the opposite. So the opposite of divide by 2 is times by 2. But you have to do that to both sides. So I essentially bring this up and I get x equals 15 multiplied by 2. 15 multiplied by 2 is 30. So x is 30 in this case. Our final example. Again, move this plus 6 to the other side because we want to get x on its own. So we'll be left with half x equals 10. The opposite of plus 6, when you move it over, it's going to become minus 6. So now we have half x equals 4. Now, remember, right now we have a half multiplied by x, so we have to do the opposite, so we divide both sides by a half. If I divide this side by a half, it just cancels and becomes 1, which is what we want. And if you do 4 divided by a half, you get 8. So x equals 8. And that's your final answer. This was just an introduction to equations. Now for expanding. So if I have 4 open bracket x plus 1, all you have to do is multiply this by the x here, and then multiply it by the 1 here. So 4 multiplied by x gives you 4x. And 4 multiplied by plus 1 just gives you plus 4. And that's the answer. Let's go to the next one. Here we have x, open bracket, x plus 2. So we're going to do x multiplied by the first term and x multiplied by the second term. When you do x multiplied by x, you get x squared. And then when you do x multiplied by plus 2, you get plus 2x. Because remember, any number multiplied by itself is just that number squared. The final example. Here we have 2x, open bracket, 4 minus x squared. So I'm going to do 2x multiplied by 4, which gives me 8x. And then I'm going to do 2x multiplied by minus x squared, which will give me minus 2 to the power of x cubed. And now for factoring. Here we have 2x plus 4. So when you factor, all you have to do is find the highest common factor between the two terms. So we have a 2x here and we have a 4 here. So the highest common factor for 2x and 4 is just 2. So if I take the 2 out and I open the bracket, 2 multiplied by what gives you x? Just x. And 2 multiplied by what gives you 4? Plus 2. Our next example. Again, the common factor for both of these is 3 because they both can be divided by 3. 3 multiplied by what gives you 3x squared, will just be x squared. And 3 multiplied by what gives you 9y, it will be plus 3y. And the final example. Here we have 2xy plus 6x squared y. Now, what is the highest common factor? Well, in terms of the numbers that are there, the highest common factor of 2 and 6 is 2. And they each have an x and a y. So when you open the bracket now, 2xy multiplied by what gives you 2xy? Just 1. And then 2xy multiplied by what gives you 6x squared y? Well, to get the 6, we have to do 2 multiplied by 3. So I put a 3 there. To get x squared, and when we already have an x, you just multiply by x. And we already have a y here, so that's your final answer. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and leave a comment down below on what topics you'd like to see sooner.